So after the Emancipation Proclamation, things started moving in a good direction for the Union. And General Lee knew that he could not overcome Northern advantages forever. The South needed a major defeat on Northern soil, and so Lee decided to attack Gettysburg in Pennsylvania in July of 1863. Now, Gettysburg was the northernmost point that the Confederacy reached. The North won the battle. It did not go well for Lee. Although the Union lost 24,000 men, Lee suffered 28,000 casualties. And so this battle was a major confidence boost for the Union. So, like I said, the battle was in July, but in November, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to give a speech to commemorate a cemetery, and in the process, redefined both the war and the country through his magnificent Gettysburg Address. Now, just because things were starting to turn around on the battlefield does not mean things were going all great in the North. The North was facing some significant challenges on the home front. Now, just like the South, the United States faced some pretty tough inflation, mostly because the printing of money, called greenbacks, because it was printed on green paper, these were printed to finance the war. And so prices in the North rose from like 10 to 20%. But that's nowhere nearly as bad as it was in the South, where prices rose over 300%. I should also mention that while I think it's pretty clear that I really do admire President Lincoln, he did do some things that very rightfully should be critiqued during the war, especially in terms of cracking down on civil liberties. For example, Lincoln did put portions of Kentucky under martial law. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which is where the government is required to bring a person under arrest before a judge or into court, especially to secure the person's release, unless lawful grounds are shown for their detention. So in the process, 14,000 Copperheads, which is a name given to Democrats who wanted peace with the South, were imprisoned during the war and without a trial. On the other hand, war was good for Northern factories. While at first, when the North stopped selling goods to the South, the economy dipped. Ultimately, it rebounded because of all of the manufacturing of uniforms and supplies. In some cases, it was probably too good because some businessmen overcharged the government and sold them way overpriced, cruddy goods and foods, and they were able to do that. They were able to get away with such shenanigans because they often paid bribes to government officials to look the other way. That whole scheme of making as much money as possible on the war is called war profiteering. Also on the home front, like in the South, Northerners did not like the draft either. Now, in the South, we saw that it was very unpopular because it seemed to contradict the whole states' rights argument that the Southerners like to talk about. But in the North had their own draft in 1863 that called men between the ages of 20 to 45 to be called into service. However, in this draft law, there was a way for wealthy citizens to get out of the draft by paying $300 or finding a substitute. Now, there was so much anger over the draft and the fact that many Northerners did not feel like they wanted to be drafted to help free enslaved people. They said, we were in this war to keep the Union together, not free the slaves. That there were riots in New York City that lasted for about 5 days. While initially rioters targeted Republicans, that anger eventually kind of transferred to African Americans, and it was really deadly. Well over 100 people died, and troops who were just coming in off of the big win in Gettysburg had to head to New York to help put down the riots. By 1864, there were a number of people that were so tired of war and the struggle that the war entailed that there was even some question if Lincoln would be reelected. And believe it or not, some Democrats were suggesting that George McClellan, the same McClellan that was such a pain in the neck for Lincoln, had a good chance at taking the presidency. Luckily, of course, that didn't happen. Probably because by the time of the elections, the North was in a really good spot. Just after the Battle of Gettysburg, Grant won an important victory at Vicksburg, and that victory gave the Union the control of the Mississippi River. That was a massive win for the North. And now Lincoln found a general that he actually kind of liked because he was willing to fight. So due to his willingness to fight, Grant took control of the Union armies. Grant then on to pursue Lee and did not give up. So Grant was willing to take heavy casualties because he knew he could replace his fallen soldiers. Remember that big advantage that the North had over the South in population? Lee couldn't do that. Ulysses S. Grant was willing to play that to his advantage. Furthermore, it just keeps getting better as we kind of get deeper into 1864, when the North took control of the big city in Georgia, Atlanta. The Union General William Tecumseh Sherman ended up burning the city to the ground and then marched across Georgia, eventually making it all the way to this coast. Call it Sherman's March to the Sea. And after this, the Confederacy was split in half, and many people in the South became convinced that the South can no longer be protected. Probably because as Sherman is moving through the South, he kind of burned and destroyed everything: railroad lines, crops, farms, and not just physical things were destroyed, but Confederate morale was destroyed. The resources were depleted. It was clear that the Confederacy couldn't protect civilians in the heartland of the South. Confederate desertions start going through the roof as people feel like they have to go home to protect their family. At this point, it becomes pretty clear that the war is pretty much over. By early 1865, it was clear to General Lee that the South couldn't win, and he surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. So things were looking up, and Lincoln decided, it's time to enjoy a night at the theater, but that didn't go well. John Wilkes Booth, a relatively famous actor, organized a conspiracy to kill members of the government. And hopefully, while Lincoln, vice president, the cabinet were all assassinated, the South would have a chance to rebound, regroup, and live to fight another day. Lincoln was the only person that was killed during the assassination attempts, although Seward was injured. So Lincoln was shot and killed at Ford's Theater, really becoming the last casualty of the war. There are some major consequences of this, though. Because of the war, it became clear that states could not nullify federal law. States could not secede. The federal government's power was greatly expanded. Before the war in the South, Southern planters were disproportionately powerful. There were a number of Southern presidents. A Southerner didn't become president again until 50 years after the Civil War. 20% of the adult white male population died in the war. There were massive economic losses because of the war. People lost their homes, their crops, their livestock, their railroads. Prior to 1860, right before the Civil War, the South contributed about 30% to the nation's wealth. In 1870, that number fell to 12%. Yeah, so women also found that the war brought new responsibility. While men were away at war in the South, wives and daughters managed plantations. On smaller farms, women plowed fields. They proved that they were capable. Women in the North took jobs in both government and business. And frankly, women just pushed the boundaries. They served as nurses. They set up training programs. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman to graduate from medical school. Clara Barton founded the Red Cross. 3,000 women served as nurses in northern hospitals. Of course, 4 million people were freed that were formerly enslaved, but laws still made them unequal, and there were great challenges ahead. Frederick Douglass said about enslaved freedmen, he had neither money, property, nor friends. He was freed from the old plantation, but he had nothing but the dusty road under his feet. He was turned loose, hungry, and destitute to the open sky. So there were certainly struggles ahead after the Civil War for the United States. Thanks for watching.